The paralyzed millionaire was treated like a monster, until the cleaner's daughter called him her prince. The crystal chandeliers cast cold light over the dining table, where 12 shareholders sat in tailored suits, their laughter polished and empty. Alexander Whitmore remained motionless at the head of the table, his motorized wheelchair positioned like a throne no one respected. The cameras from Financial Tribune captured everything: the success, the power, the empire. But they carefully angled away when saliva escaped the corner of his mouth. His Aunt Vivian stepped forward with a silk napkin, wiping his face with the efficiency of someone cleaning a countertop. No one at the table flinched. They simply continued their conversation about quarterly profits as if he'd vanished. Alexander closed his eyes, feeling the burn of invisibility worse than any physical pain. Somewhere beyond these iron gates, a woman carrying a little girl was about to shatter every wall he'd built around his frozen heart. By the way, where are you watching this story from? Drop it in the comments, we absolutely love knowing. 3 years had passed since the accident turned Alexander's body into a prison. Every morning began at 5 when nurses entered his room with procedural greetings, flipping him, washing him, dressing him like a mannequin. His bedroom stretched vast and spotless, medical equipment humming in corners where family photos should have been. Through the second-floor window, he watched gardeners maintain the perfect lawn he'd never walk on again. The memories came uninvited. That rainy night, Isabel screaming that loving him felt like embracing marble. His desperate drive through the storm to prove her wrong. The bridge, the hydroplaning, the metal crushing. His parents following behind, their car skidding into the same nightmare. They died instantly. He survived, but barely. Isabel mailed back the engagement ring while he was still intubated. Now staff whispered, the broken air, and that poor soul, in hallways. While Vivian controlled his bank accounts, his medication schedule, his entire existence under the disguise of protection. Lily Carter's alarm screamed at 4 in the morning in her cramped studio apartment. She moved through darkness, careful not to wake Maya, preparing a lunch of crackers and cheese because that's what remained until Friday's paycheck. Her daughter slept curled around a stuffed rabbit with one missing ear, peaceful in ways Lily envied. By 4:30, she'd dressed Maya and carried her half asleep to Mrs. Jensen's cluttered apartment downstairs, leaving $20 she couldn't afford. 2 buses and 90 minutes later, Lily arrived at Whitmore Mansion, her 3rd week as the replacement cleaner. The previous woman had quit abruptly, muttering something about soulless places and ghosts in expensive chairs. Lily couldn't afford philosophical concerns. The pay was double her other jobs combined, enough to prevent the eviction notice taped to her door. Vivian Whitmore delivered the rules on day 1 with a smile sharp as surgery. Never ascend to the 2nd floor. Never speak to Alexander. Never enter his private quarters. He requires solitude for healing, Vivian explained, though her eyes suggested different motives. Lily agreed immediately, nodding through instructions while calculating how this salary could cover Maya's preschool and her mother's unpaid funeral costs. She scrubbed marble floors until her knees ached, polished silver until her reflection appeared ghostly, and avoided the grand staircase like it led to forbidden territory. The mansion felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum where someone was still breathing. Everything changed on a Wednesday during Lily's 3rd week. Mrs. Jensen called at 9, her voice tight with pain. Kidney stones, ambulance coming. Impossible to watch Maya today. Lily stood in the mansion's kitchen, phone trembling in her hand, running through non-existent options. No family, no backup, no choice. She drove home, collected Maya with whispered promises of good behavior, and smuggled her daughter into the mansion through the service entrance. Stay in the pantry, baby, Lily instructed, setting up coloring books beside flour sacks. Mama needs 1 hour, just 1. Maya nodded solemnly, but curiosity lived in that child like oxygen. Lily was scrubbing the entrance hall when she heard the silence, that particular absence of sound that means a 4-year-old has disappeared. Panic flooded her veins. She ran through corridors calling Maya's name in urgent whispers, terrified of alerting Vivian while desperate to find her daughter. The trail led upward, small sneaker prints on the first 3 stairs. The 2nd-floor hallway stretched before her, forbidden and magnificent, and at the end a door stood ajar with classical music drifting out. Lily's heart hammered as she approached. Maya stood beside a motorized wheelchair where a man sat completely still, tears streaming down his face while he stared out the window. The little girl had placed her small hand over his motionless one, her head tilted in that way children have of seeing truth adults miss. "Why are you crying, Prince?" Maya asked with pure concern. Alexander's eyes widened, shock breaking through years of emotional numbness. No one had touched him with tenderness since before the accident. No one had called him anything but formal titles or pitying labels. Something cracked inside his chest. Lily appeared in the doorway, face drained of color, grabbing Maya's shoulders while apologies tumbled out in frantic streams. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Whitmore. She didn't mean to intrude. It won't happen again. Please don't." But Alexander wasn't angry. For the first time in 3 years, his mouth curved upward. The smile looked unpracticed and fragile, like something emerging from hibernation, but it was real. Maya beamed back at him, delighted to have made the sad prince happy. Footsteps echoed in the hallway with the precision of approaching judgment. Vivian appeared, her expression transforming from composed to dangerous as she absorbed the scene. The child, the cleaner, and most troubling of all, the unfamiliar expression on Alexander's face. "What is happening here?" Her voice dropped to freezing temperatures. Lily felt her entire world collapsing. Her job, her apartment, Maya's future. Everything she'd fought to build was disintegrating because her daughter had shown kindness to a lonely man. She pulled Maya closer, preparing for the end of everything, while Alexander's smile faded back into the mask he'd worn for years. But something had shifted. Something irreversible had begun, and Vivian sensed it like predators sense injured prey. Lily stood frozen in Alexander's bedroom, Maya's small fingers still wrapped around hers, while Vivian's footsteps approached like a countdown to disaster. The air thickened with unspoken consequences. Before Vivian could cross the threshold, Alexander activated his wheelchair's voice command system, the mechanical whir breaking the tension. "I allowed it. She can stay." His words came rough and labored, each syllable requiring visible effort, but they landed with absolute clarity. Vivian stopped mid-stride, her composed mask cracking for just a second. 5 months had passed since Alexander had asserted any preference about anything. She studied the scene with calculating eyes, but contradicting him in front of the staff would expose the control she'd carefully disguised as concern. "We'll discuss this later, Alexander," she said, forcing sweetness into her tone before disappearing down the hallway. The proposal came the following morning in Vivian's office. Lily would expand her duties beyond cleaning. She'd remain present during afternoon hours when the nurses took their scheduled breaks, simply to ensure Alexander wasn't alone and everything stayed orderly. The salary doubled again. Lily recognized the trap beneath the offer. Knew Vivian never extended generosity without hidden motives, but her mother's funeral bills still arrived weekly, threatening letters from debt collectors filling her mailbox. She accepted with a handshake that felt like signing something she couldn't read. The afternoons became strange interludes. Lily dusted surfaces that didn't need dusting, while Alexander watched from his position by the window. Maya, now a permanent fixture since no other childcare existed, sprawled on the carpet with crayons she'd discovered in a forgotten drawer, drawing elaborate castles and dragons. Alexander's silence gradually became less uncomfortable and more observant. His gaze followed Maya's every movement, the way she hummed while coloring, how she narrated stories to herself, the unconscious joy radiating from a child who didn't yet understand the world's cruelty. It was as if he was remembering that life could contain something besides medical routines and pitying glances. Lily noticed the subtle changes. His breathing deepened when Maya laughed. His jaw relaxed when she sang nursery rhymes off-key. His eyes brightened incrementally each afternoon they arrived. She started making small adjustments without announcing them, opening the window so fresh air replaced the antiseptic staleness. Switching his sound system from classical repetition to jazz, then blues, gauging his reactions, reading news articles aloud when she caught him staring at nothing, offering connection to a world he'd been removed from. Maya broke through his walls, with the fearlessness only children possess. She'd point at the oil paintings covering his walls, stern ancestors in gilded frames, polo trophies from another lifetime, landscapes of places he'd never visit again. "Who's that grumpy man?" she'd ask, and Alexander would force out answers. "My grandfather. He built the company." Maya wrinkled her nose. "He looks mean." Alexander's mouth twitched. He was. The exchange was simple, but it mattered. Maya never looked at him with pity, never lowered her voice to that awful sympathetic whisper everyone else used. She treated him like the friend she'd decided he was, which made him more human than 3 years of medical professionals ever had. One afternoon, Maya arrived with a construction paper crown she'd made at the neighbor's apartment, glitter falling off it in a trail behind her. She marched straight to Alexander and placed it on his head with ceremonial seriousness. "Now you're Prince Alexander for real," she declared, hands on her hips. The sound that emerged from Alexander shocked everyone in the room. A laugh, rusty and strange, like machinery starting after years of disuse, but unmistakably genuine. Lily stood in the doorway, feeling her chest constrict. She saw his loneliness laid bare in that moment, the way he gazed at Maya, as if she'd performed an actual miracle. Something shifted in Lily then. He stopped being her employer, the mysterious figure she'd been warned away from. He became someone who'd been starved of ordinary human kindness, and she found herself wanting to feed that hunger. Their first real conversation happened on a Thursday when Maya fell asleep on his leather couch after an exhausting day at the neighbor's playgroup. Alexander's voice broke the quiet. "Tell me about your life." The question caught Lily off guard. She hesitated, wiping the same bookshelf for the third time, then words spilled out. 3 jobs barely covering rent. Maya's father vanishing the moment pregnancy was mentioned. 4 hours of sleep, feeling like luxury. The constant calculation of whether to buy food or pay utilities. Her mother's death 6 months ago. The funeral she couldn't properly afford. The guilt that followed her like a shadow. Alexander listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he said something that disarmed her completely. "You're stronger than I am." Lily laughed, but it came out bitter. "Strong? Look at you, surviving all this." Alexander managed a slight headshake. "Surviving isn't living." The silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It was recognition passing between 2 people who understood different versions of the same pain. Lily sat down on the floor beside his wheelchair, something she'd never done before, and for 10 minutes they simply existed in shared understanding. Maya's soft breathing filled the room. Outside, gardeners trimmed hedges into geometric perfection. Inside, 2 wounded people found unexpected comfort in honesty. What neither of them knew was that Vivian watched everything through cameras embedded in smoke detectors and picture frames throughout the mansion. In her private office, she studied the monitor feeds, showing Alexander's transformed expressions, Lily's growing ease, Maya's uninhibited affection. She reached for her phone and dialed Richard Grayson, the family attorney who'd managed the Whitmore estate since Alexander's parents died. "We have a situation," Vivian began, her voice tight. "This woman is spending unsupervised time with Alexander. We know nothing about her background and he's vulnerable, Richard. People like her can smell money from miles away." Richard agreed immediately. Within hours, they'd initiated a comprehensive investigation. Credit history, criminal records, social media activity, interviews with former employers and neighbors. Vivian decided to test Lily's character directly. During one of her calculated visits to Alexander's room, she deliberately left a diamond bracelet, worth more than Lily earned in a year, partially hidden beneath a decorative pillow. She watched via camera as Lily discovered it while straightening cushions. Lily examined the bracelet for perhaps 3 seconds before walking directly to Vivian's office and returning it without hesitation. "Mrs. Whitmore, I found this in Mr. Alexander's room. Thought you might be looking for it." Vivian accepted it with false gratitude, while disappointment churned beneath her smile. She'd wanted proof of dishonesty, something concrete to justify her suspicions. Instead, she got the opposite. "She's clever," Vivian told Richard during their next phone call. "Playing the long game, building trust before she makes her real move." Richard's skepticism came through clearly. "Or she's simply honest, Vivian. That's also possible." But Vivian had already decided the narrative. Years of managing the Whitmore fortune had taught her that everyone wanted something, and people who claimed otherwise were just better liars. She instructed Richard to dig deeper, find the skeleton that surely existed in Lily's closet. Meanwhile, she increased her own presence in the mansion, appearing unexpectedly during Lily's shifts, asking pointed questions disguised as friendly concern, watching for any slip that would confirm her theories. The afternoon routine continued despite Vivian's surveillance. Alexander started requesting specific things. Could Lily bring newspapers instead of just reading headlines? Would she mind adjusting his chair so he could see the garden better? Could Maya show him more of her drawings? These small asks felt monumental to him, each one a tiny reclamation of autonomy he'd surrendered after the accident. Lily accommodated every request, and somewhere in the repetition, they stopped being employer and employee. They became something harder to define. Maya sealed it one evening when she was supposed to be packing up her crayons. She climbed onto the arm of Alexander's wheelchair and announced with absolute certainty, When I grow up, I'm gonna live here forever and we're gonna be a family, okay, Prince? Alexander's smile reached his eyes, but Lily felt ice water flood her veins. Because she understood what Maya couldn't, that this world wasn't theirs, that they were temporary fixtures in a life they'd never truly belonged to, that someone would eventually enforce the boundaries her daughter couldn't see. She gathered their things quickly, suddenly desperate to leave. That night, just as she was heading toward the service exit, Vivian appeared from the shadows of the main hallway. "Lily, a moment please." Her voice was silk wrapped around steel. "My office." Lily followed on shaking legs, Maya drowsy against her shoulder. Vivian's office felt like a courtroom. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound law books lining the walls, portraits of Whitmore ancestors staring down in judgment. Vivian sat behind her massive desk, fingers steepled, eyes dissecting Lily like a specimen. The question came without preamble. "Lily, what do you really want from this house?" The words hung in the air, weighted with accusation. Lily's mouth went dry. "I want to keep my job, Mrs. Whitmore, pay my bills, give my daughter a future." Vivian leaned forward, her smile sharp enough to cut. "And my nephew? What do you want from him?" The trap was obvious, but Lily had nowhere to go. "Your nephew is my employer. I respect him." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "Then remember that. He's your employer, not your friend, not your family, and certainly not the fairy tale prince my nephew's little girl keeps talking about." Lily left the office trembling, Maya heavy in her arms, feeling invisible walls closing in. She didn't see Vivian make another call to Richard the moment the door shut. Didn't hear Vivian say, "Accelerate the investigation. I want everything on her by end of week." Didn't know that Richard had already discovered something in Lily's past that would soon become a weapon. As Lily caught the late bus home, holding Maya close while the city lights blurred past, she felt the fragile peace they'd built beginning to crack. And in his room, Alexander stared at the construction paper crown Maya had left behind, wondering why happiness always felt like something he wasn't allowed to keep. The days following Vivian's warning felt different, charged with an electricity Lily couldn't name. Alexander began sharing pieces of himself he'd buried for decades, speaking in those labored sentences that cost him visible energy, but came anyway. He told her about childhood dinners, where silence was enforced, where his father discussed mergers instead of asking about his day, where affection was rationed like a dangerous substance. His grandmother had been the exception. She'd read him stories, let him mess up her garden, told him feelings weren't weaknesses. When she died during his 12th summer, something in Alexander died too. He became the heir his father demanded, ruthless in business school, efficient in social circles, successful in every metric that mattered to everyone except himself. Then came Isabel, beautiful and appropriate, whose final words before he drove into that storm still echoed, "I don't know who you are, Alexander. You won't let me in. It's like living with an ice sculpture." The bridge had been slick with rain, his parents following behind because they'd sensed something was wrong, all of them caught in the same hydroplaning nightmare. Metal shrieked, glass shattered, his spine compressed between twisted steel. He remained conscious through it all, heard his mother's last breath, felt his father's hand go limp in the adjacent wreckage, knew with certainty that his desperate attempt to prove he could love had killed the only two people obligated to love him back. Isabel returned the engagement ring via courier while he was still learning to breathe through a tube. No note, no explanation, just the ring in its velvet box, proof that his fiancée couldn't even bear to see what he'd become. "I killed them," Alexander whispered, his voice fracturing, "and lost my chance to be human." Lily was crying before she realized it, kneeling beside his wheelchair, cupping his face with both hands. "You didn't kill anyone. It was an accident. And you're still human, Alexander. I see you. Maya sees you." The exchange unlocked something in Lily. She found herself sharing her own wreckage. The boy who'd promised forever when she was 23, how he'd vanished the morning after she showed him the positive pregnancy test, leaving nothing but an empty apartment and disconnected phone number. Her parents had been devout, unforgiving, the kind of religious that confused judgment with righteousness. They'd called her shameful, a stain on the family name, turned her out with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes and burning ears from her father's final sermon about consequences. She'd survived on friends' couches and overnight shifts until Maya was born. Her mother had reached out 6 months ago, cancer eating through her body, begging forgiveness from a hospital bed Lily couldn't afford to keep her in. "I failed her," Lily said, the words barely audible. "Sold everything, borrowed from everywhere, still wasn't enough. And now I'm failing Maya because I can't give her what she deserves. Alexander's response came without hesitation despite his physical limitations. You didn't fail. You're the bravest thing I've ever seen. Something fundamental shifted in Lily then. For years, she'd been defined by her struggles. The single mother, the struggling worker, the daughter who couldn't save her parent. Alexander saw past the circumstances to the person underneath, recognized her strength as valuable, rather than merely necessary. They sat in silence after that, Maya humming while she colored, the moment stretching into something neither of them had words for. Later, when Lily left for her evening shift at the diner, Alexander made a call to his financial manager using the voice command system. Gerald, I need you to handle something. Quietly. The weeks transformed into rhythms neither of them had experienced before. Lily started preparing simple dinners in Alexander's room after getting permission from his medical team. Nothing fancy, just pasta or soup, but eaten together with Maya chattering between them. They'd sit on the floor, Alexander's adapted chair positioned at their makeshift table, creating a circle that felt more like family than any formal dining Lily had known. Maya invented games for Alexander, teaching him to wiggle his eyebrows and move his jaw in exaggerated expressions that sent her into fits of giggles. Lily read aloud in the evenings, novels she'd never had time for, while Alexander closed his eyes and let her voice wash over him. He memorized the sound of Maya's laughter, the way Lily hummed unconsciously while tidying, the weight of contentment he'd assumed was fiction. 2 weeks later, Lily received a letter from the bank that made her hands shake so badly she nearly dropped it. All her debts, the funeral costs, the eviction notices, the medical bills, everything, had been forgiven due to internal processing errors. The customer service representative she called seemed as confused as she was, but confirmed the balance was zero. Lily sat on her apartment floor and sobbed, not knowing Alexander had orchestrated it all, that he'd watched her relief through the security feed Vivian didn't know he'd accessed, that witnessing her joy gave him the first sense of purpose he'd felt since the accident. He didn't tell her, couldn't risk her pride refusing what she desperately needed, but he filed the memory of her gratitude like treasure. Meanwhile, Richard Grayson's investigation reached completion. He sat in Vivian's office spreading documents across her desk like accusations. Here's what we found. 5 years ago, Lily dated a man named Derek Voss for approximately 8 months. He's currently serving 7 years for running an investment fraud scheme. She got pregnant, he disappeared. She had no idea about his criminal activities until his arrest made local news, by which point she'd already been abandoned. He pointed to another file. The debts are extensive but all legitimate. Medical bills from her mother's cancer treatment, funeral expenses, standard cost of living debt. Nothing suspicious. If anything, she's remarkably honest. Vivian's fingers drummed against the mahogany. So we have a woman with terrible judgment in men, crushing financial pressure and convenient access to a vulnerable millionaire. Richard, this is textbook. Richard hesitated, his decades of legal practice warring with what he was seeing. Or it's a single mother doing her best in impossible circumstances. But Vivian had already constructed her narrative, each piece of evidence bending to fit her predetermined conclusion. Alexander is completely blind where she's concerned. That child has wrapped him around her finger and the mother is smart enough to let the daughter do the heavy lifting. If he changes his will or creates any legal ties to them, Vivian could claim millions in a dependency suit. The fear in Vivian's voice wasn't for Alexander's well-being. It was for the fortune she'd been managing, the control she'd cultivated, the power she'd wielded in his name. She picked up her phone, scrolling through contacts. I'm calling a family council. The board needs to understand the risk. Within 48 hours, Vivian had assembled an intervention that felt more like an ambush. Distant cousins who hadn't visited in years, business partners Alexander barely knew, even Reverend Mills from the family church, all gathered in the mansion's formal meeting room. Vivian laid out her case with prosecutorial precision. Alexander was being manipulated, his judgment compromised by loneliness and disability, his assets vulnerable to exploitation. She displayed copies of Lily's financial records, photographs of her with Derek from years ago, painted a picture of calculated seduction. We must protect our family legacy, she concluded, her voice ringing with manufactured concern. Alexander needs us to be strong when he can't be. The room murmured agreement, self-interest dressed up as family loyalty. They authorized Vivian to take necessary measures to safeguard the estate. That afternoon, while Lily was collecting Maya from the neighbors, Vivian entered Alexander's room carrying a manila folder thick with documentation. Her entrance had the quality of an execution, measured, inevitable, final. "Alexander, we need to talk about the woman you've allowed into your life." She didn't sit, standing over him in a position that emphasized his vulnerability. "I had her investigated, for your protection. What I found is deeply concerning." She opened the folder, revealing police reports with Derek's mugshot. Lily photographed beside him at some restaurant years ago. Debt collection notices, eviction warnings. This woman was involved with a convicted criminal. She was drowning financially before she entered this house. And now she's positioned herself as indispensable to you. Don't you find that strange? Alexander stared at the documents, his mind struggling to reconcile the evidence with everything he'd experienced. The photographs looked damning. Lily smiling beside a man he'd never heard her mention. The debt papers stacking up like proof of desperation. "I want to see her. Ask her. Directly." Vivian shook her head firmly. "That's exactly what she's counting on, Alexander. Your trust. Your need for connection. She'll have explanations ready. I guarantee it. But facts are facts." She tapped the police report. This man defrauded dozens of people. She was with him for months. Either she knew and didn't care, or she's dangerously naive. Either way, is that who you want influencing your decisions? Alexander's throat tightened. He wanted to defend Lily, but doubt had entered like poison, spreading through everything he'd believed about their connection. The sound of the front door opening carried up the stairs. Lily's voice calling out that they were back. Maya's feet running toward the staircase. Vivian gathered her papers smoothly. "Think about what I've shown you. And remember, Alexander, you're not just protecting yourself. You're protecting the legacy our parents died building." She left as Lily appeared in the doorway, Maya already rushing forward with a drawing she'd made. But everything had changed. When Alexander looked at Lily now, questions crowded out certainty. Had she known about Derek's crimes? Were the debts strategic, designed to make her seem sympathetic? Was Maya's affection coached? The thoughts felt like betrayal, but they wouldn't stop coming. Lily saw it immediately. The shift in his expression, the new distance in his eyes, the way he didn't smile when Maya climbed onto his chair. "Alexander? What's wrong?" Lily asked, setting down her bag, instincts screaming that something had broken while she was gone. He couldn't meet her gaze directly, his voice even more strained than usual. "Lily, tell me about Derek Voss." The name hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath, turning her legs to water. How did he know that name? Why did he sound like a prosecutor instead of a friend? Maya sensed the tension, her smile fading, small hands clutching her drawing. "Who told you about Derek?" Lily managed, her voice barely functioning. Alexander gestured with his eyes toward the folder Vivian had left on his desk. Too far for Lily to reach, close enough to poison everything. The room felt like it was collapsing, all the safety they'd built together crumbling into suspicion. And in that moment, Lily understood exactly what Vivian had done. Weaponized her past, twisted her truth, turned her survival into evidence of guilt. Lily arrived the next morning carrying wildflowers Maya had picked from the vacant lot near their building, but the room felt like stepping into winter. Alexander sat rigid in his wheelchair, face angled toward the window rather than the door, his usual greeting absent. Maya ran forward with her usual enthusiasm, clutching a new drawing, but he didn't smile or activate his chair to turn toward her. "Alexander, what happened?" Lily asked, setting the flowers down, alarm creeping through her chest. He drew a breath that seemed to take effort beyond his physical limitations. "Lily, did you know a man named Derek Voss?" The name detonated in her ribcage, stopping her breath, draining blood from her face. Derek, Maya's father, the man who'd promised everything and delivered abandonment, the ghost she'd buried under years of survival. "How do you know that name?" she whispered. Alexander gestured toward the folder on his desk, and Lily approached with legs that barely functioned. Inside were photographs, her younger self beside Derek at some restaurant, both smiling, both oblivious to what was coming. Police reports detailed his arrest for investment fraud. Her own debt collection notices stacked like accusations. Nausea rolled through her. "Alexander, I can explain all of this." He cut her off, his voice harder than she'd ever heard it. "Why didn't you tell me? You knew. I told you everything about me." Lily reached for him, desperate to bridge the sudden chasm, but Maya sensed the wrongness and began crying, her small body shaking with confused fear. Lily scooped her daughter up, tears already streaming down her own face, and left the room before she completely fell apart in front of him. Vivian moved with the precision of someone who'd been planning this endgame for weeks. She appeared in Alexander's room within an hour, voice dripping false concern. "I know this is painful, but you need protection now." She might be recording conversations, gathering evidence for future lawsuits. People target vulnerable individuals all the time. It's a documented pattern. She arranged for additional security cameras, brought in a specialist attorney who dealt exclusively with affection-based exploitation of disabled clients, and began a whisper campaign among the household staff. By afternoon, every employee knew to watch Lily carefully, to report anything suspicious, to keep valuables locked away. The mansion transformed into hostile territory overnight. Other cleaners avoided eye contact with Lily. The head housekeeper followed her through rooms as if expecting theft. When Lily tried approaching Alexander, there was always someone present. A nurse adjusting equipment, Vivian checking on details, barriers erected to prevent private conversation. 3 days passed in suffocating isolation before Lily found her opportunity. The household gathered for dinner in the main dining room, a rare occurrence, leaving Alexander briefly alone. Lily slipped into his room and dropped to her knees beside his wheelchair, words tumbling out in desperate confession. "Derek was a mistake from when I was 23. He seemed stable, kind, like someone who could be a partner. When I told him about the pregnancy, he vanished, cleaned out our shared account and disappeared. I only learned about the fraud scheme months later when his face appeared on the news. I had no idea while we were together, Alexander. I swear on Maya's life. The debts came from trying to save my mother. She needed treatment I couldn't afford, so I borrowed from everywhere, sold everything. I'd make the same choices again because she was my mother. But I never came here to deceive you. You and Maya became my family." Alexander wanted to believe her. Every cell in his body screamed to trust what he'd experienced rather than what he'd been shown. But terror was louder than hope. Terror of being the fool everyone already thought he was, of confirming that his disability made him easy prey, of losing what little control remained in his life. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Lily. I just need time." The words came out broken, and Lily fled before he could see her completely shatter. She barely made it to her car before the sobs took over, Maya clinging to her neck whispering, "Why is the prince mad at us?" Lily had no answer that wouldn't break her daughter's heart further. Unable to physically investigate, Alexander deployed the only resources he still controlled independently. He contacted Tom Harris, his former head of security who'd left the Whitmore estate after the accident, unable to watch his friend become a prisoner in his own home. Tom now ran a private investigation firm. "Tom, I need you to look into someone. Quietly. Just between us." Tom agreed without hesitation, hearing something in Alexander's voice that worried him. Simultaneously, Alexander instructed his financial manager to trace the recent debt forgiveness Lily had received. Within hours, Gerald called back with information Alexander had somehow forgotten in the chaos. "Sir, those payments were authorized by you 6 weeks ago. You specifically requested anonymity." The revelation landed like a thunderbolt. If Lily were truly manipulative, she would have demanded the money directly, leveraged his obvious care for Maya, applied pressure, but she'd never asked for anything. The doubt Vivian had planted began cracking under scrutiny. Vivian announced the charity tea with enthusiastic fanfare, a fundraiser for spinal injury research, she claimed, inviting the city's wealthiest socialites to demonstrate the Whitmore family's continued prominence despite recent challenges. The true purpose was far more calculated. She assigned Lily to serve at the event, handing her a black and white uniform that reduced her to invisible help. 20 women in designer dresses filled the sunroom, their conversation a performance of casual cruelty. Vivian orchestrated the centerpiece herself, speaking just loud enough to ensure every ear caught her meaning. "You know, we must be so careful about who enters our homes these days. Some people see opportunity where they should only see employment." Laughter rippled through the group, eyes sliding toward Lily as she poured tea with trembling hands. Mrs. Aldridge, a woman whose face had been surgically perfected into permanent surprise, leaned forward with predatory interest. "Vivian, darling, are you experiencing difficulties with unsuitable staff?" Vivian's smile could have cut glass. "Let's just say some individuals mistake generosity for weakness." Lily gripped the tea service tighter, feeling each stare like a brand against her skin. She tried maintaining composure, tried remembering this was temporary, tried thinking about Maya's preschool fees and next month's rent, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The teacup slipped, seeming to fall in slow motion, shattering against marble with a sound like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. "How careless," Vivian said, false sympathy coating her words. "Lily, dear, please clean that up." Lily knelt on the floor she'd scrubbed 100 times, gathering porcelain shards with bare hands, feeling humiliation burn through every nerve. The women resumed their conversation as if she'd become furniture, discussing vacation homes and charity boards while she bled from a cut on her palm. She barely registered. Through the window, she saw Maya in the garden under an assistant's supervision, the little girl's face pressed against the glass, watching her mother kneel before these strangers. Maya started crying, understanding in the way children do that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. She broke free from the assistant's grip and ran inside, throwing herself at Lily. "Mommy, let's go away from here." The child's voice carried through the sunroom, and Lily wrapped her arms around her daughter, her own tears finally spilling over in front of everyone. The women watched with expressions ranging from pity to disgust, and Lily knew she'd just given them confirmation of everything Vivian had suggested. From his second-floor window, Alexander witnessed the entire scene. He saw Lily kneeling among the shards, saw Maya running to her mother, saw Vivian's triumphant expression as she surveyed her handiwork. Something inside him didn't just crack, it shattered completely. The clarity hit like ice water. The real monster in this mansion had never been him. It had been Vivian all along, using his paralysis as cover for her own need for control. His hands couldn't dial a phone, but his voice command system could. "Call Tom Harris, now." The urgency in his tone bypassed every protocol. When Tom answered, Alexander didn't waste words. "I need those results. Tonight. Whatever you found." Tom's call came at 11 that evening, Alexander still positioned by his window, unable to look away from where Lily's car had been parked all day before she'd finally left hours ago. "Alex, listen carefully. This woman is completely clean. Derek Voss was a professional con artist who fooled dozens of people, including seasoned investors. Lily was just another victim. She filed a report when he disappeared, cooperated fully with investigators, had no knowledge of his schemes. The debts are all legitimate medical expenses from her mother's cancer treatment. Every dollar is accounted for. She's honest down to her DNA, man. Whoever told you otherwise is lying to you." Alexander closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his mistake settle on him like concrete. He tried calling Lily immediately, but her phone went straight to voicemail. He tried again, and again. Nothing. In her tiny apartment across the city, Lily was packing everything they owned into 2 suitcases and several garbage bags. Maya sat on the floor, clutching her stuffed rabbit, watching her mother move through rooms with mechanical efficiency. "Are we going on a trip?" the little girl asked, hope in her voice because children always hope even when adults have stopped. Lily paused, crouching down to Maya's level, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass. "We're starting over, baby, somewhere new, somewhere better." Maya's lip trembled. "But what about the prince? We didn't say goodbye." Lily pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, trying not to completely break down. "Sometimes people have to stay in their own worlds, sweetheart, and we have to find ours." She'd already given notice to her other employers, called her distant cousin Sarah, who lived 3 states away, and had grudgingly agreed to let them crash temporarily, withdrawn the last of her savings. The apartment looked skeletal with their possessions removed, just empty walls and worn carpet, no evidence they'd ever struggled here, ever built a life here, ever been anything more than temporary. Lily left the keys on the counter along with a note for the landlord, picked up Maya, and walked out at midnight carrying everything they had left. The old borrowed car started on the 3rd try, and she drove through empty streets toward the highway, leaving behind the mansion and the man who'd briefly made her believe in fairy tales before remembering that girls like her didn't get happy endings. Alexander spent the night commanding his system to keep calling, leaving message after message. "Lily, please, I know the truth now. I was wrong, so wrong, please, call me back." But the phone rang into void, and by dawn he understood she was gone. He'd pushed away the only real thing in his life since the accident because fear had proven stronger than faith. Vivian appeared in his doorway that morning, expecting to find him grateful for her protection. Instead, she found him staring at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Absolute clarity. "Get out," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in years. "And don't come back." For the first time since she'd taken control of his life, Vivian Whitmore felt genuine fear. because the man in that wheelchair wasn't broken anymore. He was finally, devastatingly awake. Before dawn broke, Lily had finished stuffing their lives into 2 battered suitcases and plastic shopping bags. She'd left a letter on the mansion's kitchen counter where the morning staff would find it, her handwriting shaky but legible. "Mr. Whitmore, thank you for the opportunity. I understand my presence caused discomfort and misinterpretation. For everyone's benefit, especially yours, I've decided to move forward. Please take care of yourself. You deserve happiness. Lily." Folded inside the storybook they'd read together, the one about brave knights and impossible quests, she placed Maya's drawing of the 3 of them as a family, the prince's crown drawn in careful yellow crayon. She buckled Maya into the back seat of a friend's borrowed sedan, her own car long since sold to pay debts that mysteriously no longer existed, and drove through empty streets toward the bus station, heading for Sarah's address 3 states away where starting over might be possible. Morning came with cruel efficiency. Alexander's nurse entered to begin the daily routine and mentioned casually that Lily hadn't arrived for her shift. Alexander's entire body tensed with premonition. Minutes later, Vivian swept in carrying the letter, satisfaction radiating from her like heat. She finally understood where she belonged and left. "It's better this way, Alexander." She handed him the note. Each word felt like a blade sliding between his ribs. The formality, the distance, the finality. He read it 3 times, searching for hidden meaning, finding only goodbye. "I need to speak with you. Alone. Now." His voice carried an edge Vivian hadn't heard in years. When the nurse departed, Alexander turned on his aunt with devastating focus. "What did you do?" Vivian's mask remained perfect, practiced over decades of corporate maneuvering. "I protected you. Protected our family name, our legacy, our wealth. She was a threat, Alexander, whether you could see it or not." Something ignited in Alexander that had been dormant since before the accident. Not anger, but certainty. "You didn't protect me. You destroyed the only genuine thing I've had since this chair, and it became my world." He activated his phone system, calling Tom with an urgency that bypassed all protocol. "Find her. Whatever it takes. Start now." But hours had already passed. The trail was cooling with every minute. Tom reported back within 30 minutes. Bus station cameras showed Lily and Maya boarding a Greyhound heading west. The bus was already 4 hours gone. Alexander made a decision that shocked everyone in the mansion. "Prepare the adapted van, I'm leaving now." Vivian moved to block his path, her composure finally cracking. "Alexander, you can't just leave. You need medical supervision. Your therapy schedule." He interrupted with a roar that tore from his throat, voice hoarse but thunderous, a sound he hadn't produced in 3 years. "You don't control me anymore." The words echoed through the hallways, freezing every staff member within earshot. Tom arrived within the hour, and they departed with Alexander positioned in the van's specialized seat, Vivian standing on the mansion steps watching her grip on him finally, irreversibly break. They drove toward the bus route, stopping at stations, showing photos on Tom's phone, offering rewards for information. Each mile was a meditation on failure and hope intertwined. Alexander stared through the window at passing landscapes he'd forgotten existed beyond the mansion's manicured grounds. His mind cataloged every mistake, the walls he'd built since childhood, the coldness he'd perfected, the love he'd rejected, because vulnerability felt like weakness. "I spent my entire life constructing barriers, and when someone finally climbed over them, I shoved her back down, just like everyone always did to me." Tom glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "So we fix it, Alex? That's why we're driving." But Alexander knew it wasn't that simple. He'd looked at Lily with suspicion instead of trust, chosen fear over faith, proven that maybe Isabel had been right all along. Maybe he was incapable of letting anyone truly in. 300 miles away, Lily and Maya sat on a Greyhound that smelled of diesel and desperation. The seats cracked vinyl that stuck to their legs. Maya pressed her face against the window, watching telephone poles blur past. "Mommy, why didn't we say goodbye to the prince?" The question landed like a punch. Lily stroked her daughter's hair, searching for words that would make sense to a 4-year-old. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people need to stay in their separate worlds." Maya's lower lip trembled in that way that preceded tears. "But he's our friend. He's our prince." Lily pulled Maya against her chest, hiding her own breaking heart, whispering reassurances she didn't believe. The bus rolled through small towns and empty highways, carrying them away from everything they'd briefly belonged to. Sarah's trailer sat in a park where dreams went to rust, aluminum boxes arranged in rows like metal tombstones. Sarah herself was 42, weathered by life, skeptical of Lily's sudden appearance with a child and luggage. "You can stay a week, maybe 2. After that, you need to figure something out. I'm barely keeping my own head above water." Lily thanked her with forced gratitude, knowing a week was better than the street. She spent the first day walking Maya to the nearest school to inquire about enrollment, while simultaneously stopping at every business in the small town, filling out applications for anything: waitress, cashier, cleaner, dishwasher. Every application asked for references. She listed her previous employers carefully, not knowing Vivian had already poisoned those wells. The calls came back within 48 hours, rejections wrapped in vague excuses. "We've decided to go another direction. Your references weren't quite what we needed." One manager was more honest. "Look, I got a call from someone saying you were let go for inappropriate conduct. I can't take that risk." Lily's stomach dropped as understanding crystallized. Vivian hadn't just pushed her out. She'd burned the ground behind her, ensuring no path back, no chance of recovery. She was trapped in a town with no prospects, living on her cousin's strained charity, watching Maya ask daily when they could go home, not understanding they had no home anymore. At night, Lily wrote a letter she'd never send, pouring out everything she couldn't say to Alexander's face. While Lily wrote those words, Richard Grayson sat in his office reviewing case files for the 3rd time, something nagging at his conscience like a splinter working deeper. He pulled Vivian's emails, the official investigation communications she'd copied him on, and began reading with the skepticism of a litigator instead of the compliance of a family attorney. The timestamps revealed conspiracy before evidence. Vivian had been strategizing about the cleaner problem weeks before Tom's investigation confirmed anything. Then Richard found something that stopped his heart: expense reports showing medical equipment purchases that Alexander's actual doctors had never ordered, payments to specialists who didn't exist, therapeutic treatments occurring on dates Alexander had been hospitalized. Vivian had been systematically embezzling from the estate for years, using Alexander's disability as cover. The realization came with sickening clarity. Vivian hadn't been protecting Alexander from Lily. She'd been protecting herself from Alexander regaining autonomy. Every decision to isolate him, control his access, limit his independence had been about maintaining the financial fraud she'd built around his paralysis. If Alexander recovered enough agency to review his own accounts, or worse, if someone like Lily encouraged him to reclaim control, the entire scheme would collapse. Richard had been complicit through negligence, trusting family over due diligence. He packed the evidence into his briefcase and drove directly to find Alexander, tracking his location through Tom's phone. He found them at a roadside motel, Alexander positioned by the window, still hoping for impossible miracles. "Alexander, I need to show you something, and I need to apologize for failing you." Richard spread documents across the motel's cheap desk: emails, falsified invoices, bank transfers, the entire architecture of Vivian's theft. Alexander absorbed it all with growing fury, not at the money, but at the manipulation, the years of being treated as an asset to manage rather than a person to respect. She wasn't protecting me. She was using me as a shield for her own crimes. Richard nodded grimly. And Lily was innocent of everything Vivian accused her of. More than innocent. She was the first person who threatened Vivian's control by treating you like a human being instead of a transaction. "I'm sorry, Alexander. I should have seen this sooner." Alexander spent the night planning his counterattack with the strategic mind that had once made him a formidable businessman before the accident. By morning, he'd coordinated with Richard to arrange an emergency board meeting, contacted every member personally through voice command, made it clear attendance was mandatory. They drove back to the mansion, Alexander entering the conference room for the first time in 3 years, the board members visibly uncomfortable at his presence. Vivian sat at the far end, confident until she saw Richard's briefcase. Alexander didn't waste time. Richard will now present evidence of embezzlement and fraud committed by my aunt against this company and against me. The presentation was damning. Bank records, forged signatures, phantom vendors. Vivian's face transformed from confident to cornered, her denials growing increasingly desperate. "This is absurd. I've dedicated years to protecting this family." Alexander cut through her protests with a voice that filled the room despite its roughness. "For years, you all treated me like I'd already died, like my paralysis made me invisible. You avoided looking at me, talked around me, decided everything without me. But one woman and her child, they saw me, really saw me, and like a coward, I doubted them. Not anymore. He paused, gathering strength. I resigned for this symbolic presidency, but I'm keeping my inheritance. Every cent goes toward rebuilding what Vivian destroyed, starting with my own humanity. The board voted unanimously to remove Vivian from all positions, to cooperate with authorities, to salvage whatever reputation remained. Vivian left escorted by security, her decades of control evaporating in a single meeting. Alexander felt no triumph, only urgency. With Richard and Tom beside him, they resumed the search with new determination, following digital breadcrumbs and phone records until they traced Lily to Sarah's trailer park. They drove through the night, Alexander's heart doing something it hadn't done since before the accident, beating for something beyond mere survival, beating because of love finally recognized and named. Dawn was breaking when they pulled into the trailer park, but Sarah's expression told them everything before she spoke. They left last night. Lily said she needed to disappear for real this time, wouldn't tell me where she was going, said it was safer that way. She handed Alexander an envelope she'd been instructed to deliver if anyone came looking. Inside was a letter in Lily's handwriting, ink smudged in places where tears had fallen. Alexander, if you're reading this, know that you were never a monster. You were the prince Maya always said you were. You proved good people still exist in this world. I know you doubted me, and I understand why, but I never doubted you. Wherever I am, I'll remember you with gratitude. Take care of yourself. You deserve everything beautiful. Lily. Alexander pressed the letter against his chest, something breaking open inside him that he'd kept locked since childhood. Tears came without shame, streaming down his face while Tom and Richard looked away to give him privacy. The sun rose over the trailer park, painting everything in gold that couldn't quite hide the rust. Alexander's voice emerged cracked but determined. Tom, find her. I don't care what it costs, how long it takes. Find her, because he'd finally learned what his grandmother had tried to teach him before she died. Love wasn't about protecting yourself from pain. It was about choosing to be brave enough to feel everything, even when the outcome was uncertain, even when the risk was absolute, even when you might lose. He'd lost her once through cowardice. He wouldn't lose her again. The search consumed 5 days that felt like years. Tom deployed every resource, hired investigators across 3 states, distributed photos to bus terminals and homeless shelters, contacted churches and community centers, offering rewards that grew larger each day. Alexander refused to quit, even when Tom gently suggested they might be chasing someone who didn't want to be caught. She may not want to be found, Tom warned carefully. Alexander's response came without hesitation. Then I'll ask her, directly, but I can't give up without trying. On the 6th day, a call came from an elementary school teacher in a town called Millbrook, population 8,000, reporting a mother and daughter matching the description had enrolled just yesterday. Lily had found work at a local diner. Maya had started preschool. Alexander traveled through the night, Tom driving while Richard handled logistics from the passenger seat. Wednesday morning arrived with overcast skies threatening rain. The diner sat on Main Street between a hardware store and a laundromat, its neon sign flickering rosies. Alexander watched through the van window as the morning shift ended, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then she appeared, Lily in a grease-stained uniform, hair pulled back in a messy bun, exhaustion written in every line of her body. Maya was asleep against her shoulder, tiny arms wrapped around her mother's neck. Lily stepped onto the sidewalk and froze mid-stride when she saw the adapted van. Tom opened the lift and Alexander descended, operating his motorized chair across cracked pavement. For a moment, neither spoke. The distance between them was maybe 10 feet, but felt infinite. Alexander moved forward first, tears already streaming unchecked down his face. Lily, I'm sorry. So sorry. She shook her head sharply, backing away instinctively. Alexander, please don't do this. I built something here, don't dig everything back up. Her voice carried exhaustion beyond the physical, the kind that comes from surviving repeated destructions. Alexander kept coming, his voice fracturing with emotion. I know. I hurt you. No, I humiliated you. But you need to know the truth. He gestured to Richard, who approached with a thick folder. Lily shifted Maya's weight and took it with one hand, flipping through pages that detailed Vivian's embezzlement, the conspiracy, the manufactured evidence against her, Tom's investigation clearing her completely. Her hands trembled as understanding crystallized. She'd been innocent all along, and he'd chosen fear over faith. "So you believed them instead of me," Lily said, her voice sharp enough to cut. The anger felt justified, necessary, the only shield she had left against more pain. Alexander didn't flinch from the accusation. "Yes, and it was, the biggest mistake of my life. I let fear win, like I always have. But Lily, you taught me life could be different. That trust was possible. That love." He paused, the word hanging between them for the first time, named and undeniable. That love was real. Lily closed her eyes, tears spilling over despite her determination to stay guarded. Everything she'd buried, the hurt, the hope, the impossible dreams she'd forced herself to abandon, came rushing back with suffocating force. Maya stirred against Lily's shoulder, lifting her head sleepily. Her eyes focused on Alexander, and suddenly she was wide awake, screaming "Prince" with pure joy. She launched herself from her mother's arms before Lily could stop her, running to Alexander's chair and climbing onto his lap, wrapping her small arms around his neck with fierce possession. "You disappeared. You left without saying goodbye," she accused, her small fists tapping his chest in reproach. Alexander laughed through his tears, the sound breaking and beautiful. "No, princess, I was the one who left. But I promised never again." He looked up at Lily over Maya's curls, his expression holding everything he'd never learned to say, until her, "I promise, never again." Lily's defenses were crumbling, but she held on to the practical concerns that had kept her alive. "Alexander, I can't return to that world. I don't belong there. Maya doesn't belong there." She gestured at the small town around them, the modest storefronts, the pickup trucks, the working-class reality that was her universe. Alexander met her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're right, you don't belong there. So I'm leaving that world behind. I'm selling the mansion, giving up everything that ties me to that place. And I'm building a life where we can be who we really are, together." The declaration hung in the morning air, impossible and absolute. Lily stared at him, searching for doubt, finding only determination. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious in my entire life." Alexander's voice carried conviction that transcended his physical limitations. He'd spent the 5-day search planning exactly this: how to dismantle the prison of his old life, how to construct something authentic from the ruins. "I don't need a mansion. I don't need power or status. I need you. I need Maya. I need mornings like this, where someone sees me as human, not as tragedy or asset. I need family." The word family broke something in Lily, all her carefully maintained distance dissolving. She sank down onto the sidewalk beside his chair, Maya still clinging to Alexander, and let herself cry for everything they'd lost and everything they might still salvage. They returned to the mansion one final time, the three of them together. Vivian was in the drawing room when they entered, her face cycling through shock, rage, and finally fear as she realized what Alexander's return with them meant. Richard had arranged a final assembly. The remaining board members, the family attorney, 2 cousins who'd sat silent during Vivian's schemes. Alexander positioned himself at the head of the conference table with Lily standing beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder, Maya coloring quietly in the corner. "I'm here to announce several decisions," Alexander began, his voice steady, despite the effort each word required. "This mansion will become the Whitmore Rehabilitation Center for people with spinal injuries, administered by a foundation in my parents' names." The room erupted in murmurs, but Alexander continued without pause. "Vivian will be formally charged with embezzlement and removed from all positions of authority. Most of my fortune will be transferred to the foundation and ethical investments. I'm keeping enough to live comfortably, but I don't need an empire." Vivian stood abruptly, her composure finally shattering completely. "You're throwing away everything for a cleaning woman and a bastard child. Our ancestors are turning in their graves." The words were meant to wound, to remind everyone of class and propriety and the rules that supposedly governed their world. Alexander smiled, and the expression held something Vivian had never seen in him: absolute peace. "No, for the first time, They'd be proud, because I finally learned what actually matters. Richard stepped forward, his tone professionally lethal. Vivian, I strongly suggest you cooperate with the criminal investigation. The alternative involves prosecution that will make your embezzlement conviction look merciful. The legal machinery was already in motion. Richard had contacted authorities, frozen Vivian's accounts, documented every fraudulent transaction. Vivian looked around the room for allies and found none, just people protecting their own interests by distancing themselves from her toxicity. She left with a single suitcase, her decades of control evaporating between one breath and the next. The door closed behind her with definitive softness. Alexander exhaled, feeling lighter than he had in years. Now we go. Build something real. 6 months later, they lived in a ranch-style house in a neighborhood where children rode bikes and neighbors waved from porches. The house had ramps and wider doorways, grab bars in the bathroom and a roll-in shower, but it also had Maya's artwork taped to the refrigerator and Lily's herbs growing in window boxes. Alexander's physical therapy had yielded unexpected progress. He'd regained some shoulder mobility and could operate a manual wheelchair for short periods, each small victory feeling monumental. He'd started consulting work, advising companies on accessibility and inclusive design, finding purpose in helping others avoid the isolation he'd experienced. His calendar filled with video conferences and site visits, but he never worked past 5 because that's when Maya got home from school. Lily enrolled in a nursing program at the community college, attending classes 3 mornings a week while Maya was in school and Alexander worked. Her professors praised her natural empathy, her ability to see patients as people rather than diagnoses, skills she'd learned from being both caregiver and survivor. She studied at their kitchen table while Alexander helped Maya with homework beside her, the 3 of them creating a tableau of ordinary domesticity that felt more valuable than any luxury Alexander had ever known. On weekends, they took walks through the neighborhood park, Alexander's chair navigating paved paths while Maya ran ahead collecting leaves and rocks she deemed treasure. Other families waved and stopped to chat, and slowly they wove themselves into the community fabric. The legal resolution brought its own form of justice. Vivian was ordered to repay the embezzled funds and sentenced to community service plus probation, her social standing demolished, her network of influence collapsed. She moved to a different state, living under diminished circumstances with only the money she'd legitimately earned. Richard became a trusted advisor and friend, helping Alexander transform the mansion into a rehabilitation center that opened its doors to patients regardless of their ability to pay. The facility offered not just physical therapy but counseling, peer support groups, job training, everything Alexander wished he'd received when he first became paralyzed. On opening day, he cut the ribbon from his wheelchair with Lily and Maya beside him, photographers capturing a man who looked genuinely happy for the first time in years. Isabel sent a letter 3 months after Alexander's transformation became public knowledge, her words carefully crafted to suggest reconciliation without actually apologizing. Alexander read it once, handed it to Lily for her opinion, then dictated his response. That chapter is closed. I have a family now. I wish you well, but my future is here. He didn't hear from her again. The past stopped haunting him once he stopped feeding it attention. Once he understood that closure didn't require forgiveness or understanding. Sometimes it just required choosing to look forward instead of back. The foundation grew, helping dozens of people navigate the early trauma of spinal injury, offering them hope that life could still hold meaning and connection and joy. One evening in early autumn, Alexander and Lily sat in their backyard while Maya chased fireflies through the growing darkness, her laughter floating back to them like music. Lily had taken Alexander's hand without thinking, their fingers intertwined naturally now, comfort replacing the early awkwardness. Alexander watched the stars emerging in the deepening sky and spoke quietly. You know, before the accident, I had everything, money, power, respect, but I was invisible, even to myself. After the accident, I thought I'd lost everything, but actually that's when I finally started living. Lily squeezed his hand, her head resting against his shoulder. We saved each other, Alexander. Neither of us did it alone. He turned to look at her, this woman who'd walked into his life carrying her daughter and her quiet dignity, who'd seen him when everyone else looked away. No, you saved me. I just finally had the courage to accept it. Maya ran back to them, breathless and glowing, holding 3 fireflies cupped gently in her hands. She opened her palms to show them the insects' intermittent glow, then let them go, watching them drift upward into the night. She retrieved the paper crown from where she'd left it on the patio table, the same one she'd made months ago, now held together with tape and love, and placed it on Alexander's head with ceremonial gravity. "You're still my prince, you know that?" Her voice carried absolute certainty, the kind only children possess. Alexander's eyes filled with tears that didn't shame him anymore, tears of gratitude rather than grief. "And you're still my princess, always." Maya climbed into his lap, settling against his chest with the trust of a child who'd never known him as anything but safe. Lily watched them, these 2 people who'd become her entire world, and felt the weight of impossible choices finally lift. They'd found each other across every barrier society had constructed: class, wealth, circumstance, fear, and built something that didn't exist in fairy tales because it was real and flawed and more valuable than perfection. This was family, not the version defined by blood or law, but the version you chose every single day despite its difficulty. This story is about more than wealth or poverty, about more than disability or health. It's about being truly seen by another person, about loving despite every reason fear gives you not to, about having the courage to choose what genuinely matters when the world insists you're choosing wrong. If you were in Alexander's position, would you have the strength to walk away from everything you'd been taught defined you for the chance to finally be free? And if you were Lily, could you forgive someone who doubted you when you'd given them every reason to believe? Tell us in the comments, we'd love to know your thoughts. And if this story touched something in you like it touched us, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs reminding that real love doesn't see bank accounts or social status or physical limitations. It just sees the heart. Thank you for staying with us through this entire journey. From wherever you're watching, whatever brought you here today, we're grateful you gave us your time. We're grateful you believed, like Maya did, that princes and princesses exist outside of fairy tales. They're just regular people brave enough to choose love.